when I was putting this conference together and trying to find people from the United States Virgin Islands to come and talk, initially a gentleman named Mr. David Brewer, who is a very experienced archaeologist working for the government in the Virgin Islands, had agreed to come over and talk, but unfortunately some rather important people turned up who requested meetings with him, and they had to take precedence over him coming here today. So whilst it's unfortunate he can't be here with us, I'm sure the meetings that he's actually attended are all going to be very positive. However, Mr. Ken Wilde, who's, as well as being as a colleague, is an old friend, I've known Ken since 1998-99, mentioned to me that he had 2 Danish intern students with him who were doing work on the Danish archives. And so I was faced with the option of either giving a presentation myself or finding somebody else. Now, based on the fact that I probably talk too much anyway, I decided somebody else should probably do it. And so I asked if the Danish students would be interested in giving us a presentation, and they were, and we're very lucky to have these 2 students from the University of Copenhagen with us today. Now, I'm not good with names at the best of times, and so I know I'm probably going to pronounce these names wrong, but I'm sure the young ladies will correct me whilst I give you their bios. First of all, Miss Christine Kamp Albaek. Christine is currently a graduate student majoring in history at the Saxo Institute at the University of Copenhagen. In addition to studying, Ms. Kamp Albaek also works as a student assistant at the Danish National Archives on the project of digitalizing the archival material from the former Danish West Indies. Christine also conducts guided tours and teaches at the Workers' Museum in Copenhagen. Samantha Nordholt Agard. Samantha is a graduate student in history at the Saxo Institute, University of Copenhagen. Since 2014, Samantha has worked as a student assistant at the Maritime Museum of Denmark in Elsinore. From April 2015 to January 2016, Samantha took part in the National Museum of Denmark's digitization of the Gudmund Hut collection, consisting of almost 5,000 objects of pre-Columbian origin, primarily from the United States Virgin Islands. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the 2 people that have traveled the furthest to come and attend this conference, Samantha and Christine.
Hi everyone. Okay, I'm gonna give. Yes, I'm Christine, and
I'm Samantha,
and we are the Danish students who just arrived at St. John this Saturday. Yeah, so we're just getting started on this project. We are doing this internship that Ken Wilde was talking about, and our presentation is called Stories of the Danish Archives, and really is about what we are going to find and what this internship is going to be like for us, and what it has been like for us, and what we're going to be doing. So our qualifications for this, doing this internship, is pretty much that we are history students. You need to be able to use the archives that are in Copenhagen. Ken Wilde told us that he tried to do this with archaeologists, but they didn't really feel like sitting in the archives all day long, and that's pretty much what we've been doing up until now. It is nice to have some pre-knowledge of the colonial period, and the Virgin Island history is helpful, but it's really not something that the previous interns all have had, so it's not necessary, I guess, to do this internship. So really, the most important skill we possess, I think, is the language. We can read the Danish sources. And of course, maybe living in proximity to the archives. So what we will mostly be talking about is how we can help the National Park Service with our skills, our abilities with studying the archives, but really it should not be untold that this is also like a really great opportunity for us as students to come and do some real research, something that's not just going to be lying on a shelf and not being used ever again. This is actually helpful. So that's a great opportunity, and plenty of students of history in Copenhagen and in the other Danish cities would love to have an opportunity like this. So there's definitely a market for Danish history students, I think, in this regard. As Mitch said, we were told to give this presentation Wednesday. So it's not going to be that long, and some of the things might not only make sense to ourselves. We don't know really. We're kind of in the middle of the process of this internship. So if something is unclear or anything, really just ask some questions afterwards. There's going to be plenty of time. We're not going to do 45 minutes. We don't have that kind of material. Yeah.
Yep. And we've just made a short overview of what we're going to do. In a moment, I'm going to tell you something about, more specific about the plantation and the project that we're doing. We're going to tell you a little bit about the research in the archives, more than Christine has already mentioned. We're also going to address the research we are going to be at USVI. We're going to tell a little bit about combining history and archaeology, which we're doing in this project. We also, of course, have some stories from the archives, and also what these on-site stories can really bring forward. And at the end, if you should have any questions, then please, you may ask them. So Ken showed you another map that this man, Peter Oxholm, did in the 1800s, or sorry, in the 1800s. This map is from 1800, and the circle that is marked is the plantation d'Espérance that we are investigating. And yeah, you may click. We can see it a little bit further here. So it's an inland plantation, so the boundaries weren't towards the sea, which of course gave some problems regarding getting the sugar shipped away. It was occupied in 1721 by the, at that time, Danish governor, Erik Bredal, who also was the man who initiated the colonization of St. John on the Danish behalf. It was owned by other men as well, primarily Dutchmen, and also another Dane in the 1700s, which Christine will tell you more about later. See if I got everything right here. Yep. I will turn it over to you then.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Research in the archives, and a photo of one of the land lists, which is a part of the land text records for St. John. So the research in the archives, and why this is important to be able to tell these stories about the lives that were lived on these islands, gives a lot of possibilities. Like Ken Wild also mentioned, there's there's thousands of boxes filled with documents in the Danish National Archives about the Danish West Indies in general. Most of them, even though most of them are sources to St. Croix, relates to St. Croix and St. Thomas, there are still a great amount of specifically St. John related sources, much more than any one person can go through, and that's probably why a part of why this internship keeps coming back year after year, because there is always new source material to look at. What we primarily do with these documents is outlining the owners and the size of the plantation, what kind of production and occupation. Also, as far as much as possible, the lives of the enslaved people on the island, but that's something that's a little more difficult to get really to in the archives. So of course this initial research is crucial to get to for us and really for others also to be able to tell the stories, the hidden stories that are inside these archives. The limitations of the archives are also important to be aware of course. They're of course, everything that has been recorded has in some way a capacity, an agenda, a reason, a thought behind it, why it was recorded, many times what we will be using is a record that was originally produced for something else. So, for instance, with the land tax records, we're using them to tell us something about the estates and the amount of slaves, how many people were living on the estates, but really what they're produced for was to make sure that everyone paid taxes. This is why it's a good document to use, because I think people have always been very meticulous about making sure that the taxes were going to be paid. So, so we can use these documents, but that means that some of the information that we will be retrieving from it is not maybe always that precise. In addition to that, some of the things that that really is difficult is that some of the things that are never recorded, really. For instance, the voices of the enslaved people are pretty much non-existent in these records. So that is something that the historical part, the archival research, can't produce by itself. So, like many other archives around the world, the Danish National Archive and the particular archive of the Danish West Indies, tells kind of the stories of the rulers in a particular time and place. I think that might be, yep.
So, Ken mentioned a few things about what the National Park Service do when they are on-site investigation, on the on-site investigations. And because this project is still ongoing, we haven't really done anything of this yet. We start on Monday. So there are a lot of things that we won't be able to tell you. But we know that we are going to do GIS registration of the buildings in order to see how they are placed within the plantation ground. And we're also going to collect ceramics and hopefully also find clay pipes that will enable us to date when people live there, maybe to see if the quantum is big or small, what that will be able to tell us. And hopefully, if we're lucky, the findings that we do on site are in alignment with what we have found in the archives. But time will show. There are some really good things about archaeology. And that's because some of these archaeological findings ceramics doesn't really have an agenda in the same way as a person who would write maybe his memoirs or something like that. So in that way, it's easier for us to use it. Also, the ceramics and shirts and other things that we would collect are an example of the material culture that was on the estate. And we can use that to show some of the things that people had, also the enslaved people in that way. If you look at the picture, these are from Les Brans. The one to your left, yes, left, is a tombstone. We have several people buried there. This is a local Creole, but with Dutch descent, called Heinrich Tonis. And then we also have a bridge that was made over a gut, that at that point was, of course, flowing with water. But now we have sort of talked about archaeology and history as two things that are apart. But really, what makes this internship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be only this internship, it could be an inspiration for the BVI as well, for some of the research that they might be doing on your cultural heritage sites. Because combining history and archaeology, we will be able to hopefully identifying buildings. The building that you are seeing right now, Ken Wild is not sure what it was used for. Maybe it could be an animal pen, but it's quite far away from the animal mill and from all the other factory buildings, and even also a little bit from the water. So hopefully, when we go in the archives and we can see in auction protocols or probates which buildings there were at that specific time in history, then we might be able to help him to tell which building this might have been. So hopefully we will be able to do that.
Yes. In addition to that, we also kind of forgot, I guess, to tell Ken Wild that we might be able to find a new plantation. That is not really that uncommon to during these internships to find new, not new, obviously, unknown plantations. But our plantation, Les Brans, was bought some of another plantation situated south of the border of Les Brans in 1736, I think. Yes, and the other part of that plantation was bought by the further south plantation Sieben. So this site is not something that is known. It's not remains that has been found yet. So possibly what this internship can do is help to be able to find and therefore be able to preserve unknown heritage sites. Previous internship have found one or several new plantations or new buildings that can help to add on to the stories of the ones that are already known. So that is a big part of what this internship can achieve. Yep. And a little story from our plantation. Detlev Petersen, he's called, one of the owners, an 18th century shopaholic. He owned, well, we found a couple of owners of Les Brans was Danish officials or working for the Danish administration in some kind of capacity. And Detlev Petersen here is a good example of one of them. He owned Les Brans from 1768 to 1782 when he dies. In the auction protocols, we can see that Petersen is very, very enthusiastic in buying things at the auctions. Almost every auction he buys some kind of luxurious thing like a mahogany bed or game tables, violins, all kinds of different things, different items. That, of course, says something about the culture of the European planters in this particular period. But most of the planters really on St. John were, compared to St. Croix or St. Thomas, relatively poor. So they wouldn't have had the money, most of them, to live to live really luxurious lives. But it would seem like that this was not the case for Detlev Petersen. Though, looking through the probates, we found out that when he died and his plantation were going to be sold, there was an enormous debt in this plantation for more than 50,000 riksdaler, which is more than the plantation itself was even worth. So he kind of had been living a very luxurious life that he couldn't really afford, and that kind of tells a story about a kind of I don't know, a weird dilemma, a weird culture of these islands that were there. We, as Samantha said, haven't excavated or searched the plantation yet, but hopefully we can find something to tell us more about the material culture, maybe also about the material culture of the enslaved people on this plantation and how it would affect maybe them that to have an owner who were kind of a shopaholic and living maybe beyond his means, you can say. But it's an interesting paradox to see, to find these kind of stories in the archives.
What we find in the archives, we'll be able to, with all this fundamental research, to use in National Park Services interpreters when they walk around with tourists on these tours, and they can use them on site. The picture that you can see right now is from the Great House from L'Espérance, and if you imagine that instead of sitting here in this conference room, that you would have been on site at the plantation, and then a story like this could have been told to you. You could have imagined where maybe the furniture would have been, and if you could list up all the furniture, Christine, she only mentioned a few of them, but if you could list up all of them, well, there wouldn't really be room for them. And when you just look at this picture right now, I can hardly imagine that you will be able to figure out how large or how small this great house indeed is, because there is no size, there's no scale on this picture. So it would be easier if you were there. And that is what this project can really do, and what we would like to emphasize here, that it's sort of unique that you can take these stories and put them on site, because that makes these buildings come alive. If there are no stories connected to them, if you don't know who ever owned them, if you don't even know what these buildings were used for, well, then they are sort of not more than just buildings. But if you find out who owned them, if you find out what happened there, what was the people's lives, there could be almost anything, really. Then we will be able to sort of do these buildings their justice, and also to enable them to come alive again. Yeah. And if there should be any questions. Yes.
In reference to what?
Well, now maybe I should take a look back right now. But I don't remember that we have, but we have read other references, other articles by other Danes that reference back to this, to some of these sources. Well, I remember last night when we met up with you, or maybe was it today? Now I can't remember, but sorry. That you mentioned, was it Braithwaite? Braithwaite. Well, I know that name is in the tax records, because I can remember that one. But we haven't looked specifically at it, but I remember that it is there. So there is definitely information about which plantations did the planters from Tortola own in St. John, and we will also be able to find out where they are placed today. That would be possible. And I know that some of the correspondence that the governor that first owned L'Esperance, Bredal, I know that there are some things that he writes back to the Danish government to tell them about the occupation of St. John. What were their concerns about the British being here? Would they come? Would they take over the islands? And you can really see it in that the first time that they go there, all the planters and also the governor, they leave the island after they came to St. John and drank a little bit. And then they went back because they were so afraid of the British. So it was only the soldiers and the slaves that were left behind to build the fort.
There are also a lot of the archival materials that are sources that are named sources for incoming copies from officials of probably other islands, at least non-Danish officials. So I think there's a lot of sources to connect these islands in a more substantial way, I think.
Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Wheatley. I just received a copy of my family genealogy. It's quite interesting. And the names of the surnames I find fascinating. The thing about it is that I don't know. I know which some are Spanish. I can pick out those. But I always wonder which ones may have come from your area. Now, I know Gade. When I go into St. Thomas, I know not to say Gade. We know to say Vestigata. Friedenhoj is a problem. I call it Frydenhoj. So I said to myself, that is Friedenhoj. So it's the pronunciation, really. It fascinates me. And I don't know how much surnames, for that matter, actually fascinate me. Because I see Lindquist in my family name here now. I see an Ordain, that sounds British, doesn't it? An Eloi in my family. A Babineaux, an Ludvig, and Tofay. And these are surnames from ages ago. And this is the area that really fascinates me. How, we know which ones have continued here. We know the Hetheringtons and the Farringtons and so forth. We know those for the BVI. But I'm always at a loss when I go to St. Croix. Am I saying that thing correctly? When I call the name of a place, am I saying it correctly? And it's any name in St. Croix for that matter. Any of the names that are strange to me. And I realize that they must be Danish. Because Friedenhoj definitely must be. And you have a number of names over there that in St. Croix that I find fascinating. So it isn't really a question, it's my fascination with surnames.
Okay.
And I think it would be a good project for somebody to get into the surnames that have survived over the many years. And we have quite a few that have survived. But I am actually fascinated, and Mitch knows all about my fascination. So does Dr. Smith over there. They all know about my fascination with names. Unfortunately, I belong to the plantation here, the Nottingham plantation. I am a resident there, and that's my place, and I claim it as my place, and that's the way I feel about it. So that I was just saying that when any students around, or there are no students, so that I would like you to get into the surnames and do a project for me, please. So I went all around to beg. Somebody, do a project on surnames in the British Virgin Islands, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks, boss. Thanks, Mrs. Wheatley. Okay, any more questions for Samantha and Christine? All right, put your hands together. Thank you very much. It's very short notice, and they put together a fantastic presentation.